In 1996, a rising criminal defense attorney vanished without a trace after her car was found near a bridge. Everyone assumed she had jumped to her death, until 7 years later, a briefcase buried in mud, and time was found by boys fishing along a riverbank, reigniting a case the city had quietly forgotten. The Croton River had calmed after a week of heavy rains, but along the low banks, clusters of debris clung to the edges: branches, plastic bags, bits of fencing. A trio of boys from Glen Hollow Middle School had ducked out of class with second-hand rods and the promise of a good catch. They weren't supposed to be there. That was half the fun. One of them, Kyle Bishop, noticed a dark, rectangular shape half buried beneath a mat of roots. He stepped off the rock ledge and nudged it with the toe of his sneaker. It didn't move. "I think it's a briefcase," he said, crouching down. "No way," muttered Dean, the oldest of the three. "Probably trash." But it wasn't. Once they tugged it free, its weight startled them. The corners were scuffed raw, the latches rusted, one side warped as if it had been crushed. Kyle unhooked the latch with effort. When it opened, the smell hit them first. Earthy, stale, something like mildew and paper rot. Inside were fragments of once white pages fused together, ink stains bleeding across them. Beneath the mess, tucked into a crumbling folder, was a laminated card. Dean pulled it out and read it aloud. "Evelyn Marks, attorney at law." They stared at each other. The name didn't mean anything to them, but the title did. They carried the briefcase to the edge of the road and flagged down a passing sheriff's cruiser. Officer Langston took it with a nod, glanced at the ID, and loaded it into the trunk. He might have dismissed it, until the name registered in his memory. 2 hours later, it landed on a detective's desk in Hudson County. Detective Natalie Reyes had only been with the Hudson County Sheriff's Department for 6 weeks. Her last assignment had been in Albany, violent crimes. She wasn't especially sentimental, nor did she come to the cold case division looking to reinvent herself. But there was a steadiness in unsolved things that suited her. When the briefcase came in, it was logged as recovered property, mud-caked, degraded, contents uncertain. Reyes glanced through the report quickly. What caught her eye wasn't the disintegrated contents, but the bar card, still intact enough to verify. "Evelyn Marks," she murmured, setting the printout aside. She tapped into the department archive. The file number came up cold, 96-1042. The archived case notes were brief. Missing person, female, age 36, criminal defense attorney. Last seen June 19, 1996. Car found parked on the Bear Mountain Bridge. Doors unlocked, no sign of a struggle, no suicide note, no confirmed witnesses. After a week of searching, authorities leaned toward voluntary disappearance, possibly suicide. The family declined further press. Case was marked inactive by fall. Reyes sat back in her chair. She skimmed the summary twice. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, then typed in a request to retrieve the physical file from deep storage. 2 hours later, she had it in her hands. The next morning, Reyes attended the morning briefing, waiting until the end to ask her question. "Anyone here remember Evelyn Marks?" she asked. A few raised brows, but no immediate response. Finally, Sergeant Halverson, the most senior in the unit, rubbed his chin. "Lawyer, right? Took on a lot of dirty cases. Her car showed up on the bridge. That was a weird one." "Why'd they close it?" Reyes asked. "Body never turned up. No new leads." "Did anyone check what cases she was working?" "Not that I know of. You're saying this is worth digging up?" Reyes didn't answer directly. She simply stood, holding up a printed photo of the briefcase found by the river. How'd her briefcase end up downstream, miles away from where her car was found? Halverson shrugged. "Maybe it just fell?" She didn't press further, but the thought stuck. June 1996. Evelyn Marks stood in the courthouse rotunda reviewing case notes, a stack of subpoenas clutched in one hand. Her eyes moved quickly, lips pressed tight. Her client, a teenage boy, was being railroaded, and she knew it. But lately, she'd noticed things. Motion requests disappearing, phone calls unreturned, conversations ending the moment she entered a room. That evening, she locked her office earlier than usual. Colleagues noted she looked tired but focused. One receptionist remembered her asking if the legal messenger service still operated after 9 p.m. No one asked why. The next morning, her silver Volvo was found parked on the eastbound lane of Bear Mountain Bridge. Driver's side door ajar. A jacket draped over the front seat. No purse, no phone. Search and rescue dragged the river for 3 days. Her colleagues were shocked. Her sister refused interviews. Eventually, the town moved on. Reyes left the precinct that evening with the file tucked under her arm. She wasn't the kind to jump to conclusions, but some cases had a weight that clung to them, and this one didn't feel like suicide. Natalie Reyes didn't expect much from the cold case archive, but even by outdated standards, Evelyn Marks's file was startlingly bare. A tan folder, brittle at the corners, no thicker than a court summons. Inside, a 3-page incident report, a 2-sentence witness summary, and a typed conclusion recommending no further investigation. No canvas forms, no forensics report, no timeline, no follow-up notations. She flipped back to the incident report. Evelyn's car had been found by a highway patrol officer around 6:45 a.m., parked just shy of the Bear Mountain Bridge pedestrian gate. Keys still in the ignition. Doors unlocked. No purse, no phone. The car was towed and processed as abandoned. No one photographed the interior. One note, hand-scrawled in the margin by an unknown officer, read, CIA envelope referred by EM, possible misconduct. The envelope wasn't attached. Reyes checked the file jacket twice. Nothing. She checked the case status form on the back. Closed, September 4th, 1996. No foul play suspected. Initialed by a captain who'd long since retired. Reyes shut the folder, slid it back into the box, and checked the property tag. Labeled inactive. She signed it out for review and carried it to her desk. The evidence lockup was in the basement. A concrete-walled vault lined with shelves of aging cardboard and rusted metal bins. Reyes walked slowly down the aisle, passing cases labeled with years, offenses, and city districts. She reached the 1996 archive and located Evelyn's name on a battered white label. Inside was a single envelope. It contained Evelyn's DMV records, a faded photo from her bar application, and a list of open cases at the time of her disappearance. No legal documents or handwritten notes. Nothing that indicated who she'd been or what she might have been working on. She returned the box to the shelf and made a note to pull Evelyn's trial records from court storage instead. Then she drove to Evelyn's last listed next of kin. Laura Marks answered the door without a smile. She looked to be in her early 40s, younger than Reyes expected. Her arms were crossed before she even spoke. "I figured it'd come up again eventually," she said. "All it took was a briefcase floating down a river." Natalie introduced herself plainly, offered her card, and waited for an invitation that didn't come. After a long pause, Laura opened the screen door and led her into a sparsely furnished living room. Nothing about the house suggested Evelyn. "I know what you're going to ask," Laura said, sitting on the edge of the sofa. "And the answer is no. She didn't kill herself." Natalie didn't argue. She waited. She was cautious, obsessive even, locked her office, kept duplicates of everything. She wasn't the type to give up. Laura paused, then added, "Especially not over work." "Do you remember anything unusual around the time she disappeared?" Reyes asked. Laura stood and went into the hall, returning with a small, taped-up shoebox. She handed it to Natalie. 2 days before she went missing, she had a locksmith come to her house. Said the hinge on her evidence safe was damaged. "She was nervous," Laura added. "I asked her if something was wrong, and she said—" She stopped, the words clearly difficult. "She said, if anything happens to me, don't believe anything they say." Natalie nodded slowly, committing the phrasing to memory. "Did she ever mention specific names? Clients? Threats?" "No, she didn't talk about that stuff. Said it was safer if I didn't know." She lived alone? Yes, always did. Reyes wrote a few more notes, thanked her, and stood to leave. Laura walked her to the door but stopped before she opened it. I never believed she walked off the bridge. Please get justice for my sister. It's been too long. Do you think Evelyn jumped off that bridge, or was she silenced? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Who was Evelyn trying to expose before she disappeared? And will Natalie finally solve this mystery after all these years? Give this video a like and keep watching to find out. Also, comment below where you're tuning in from today. The following day, Natalie sat cross-legged in the municipal archive, surrounded by folders stacked in uneven piles. She had spent the past 2 hours scanning case logs from Evelyn Marx's final year in court. One file sat apart from the others, thicker, flagged with red ink at the edges. People v. Marcus Brandt. A 16-page summary detailed the 1996 robbery that ended in the death of off-duty officer Glenn Turney. Marcus Brandt, 17, had been arrested the same night, reportedly found hiding 2 blocks from the liquor store with blood on his sweatshirt and a discarded .38 recovered from a dumpster nearby. The file suggested open and shut. But Evelyn Marx had taken the case pro bono, citing irregularities in the arrest report. She had requested suppression hearings, filed motions questioning the chain of custody, demanded officer discipline records. 3 days before jury selection, she disappeared. The trial collapsed. Marcus pled guilty under pressure from a public defender. Natalie flipped to the arrest summary again, 2 names underlined: Detective Ray DeLuca, Detective Carter Humes. She circled them, then checked the incident log from the same precinct, District 42, spanning that same year. Those names came up often, too often. Reyes drove north before dawn. Marcus Brandt was now serving a 15-year sentence at Clinton Correctional near the Canadian border. The prison exterior was drab and square, each wing designed more for containment than visibility. After clearing the gate, Natalie was led to a side room where inmates met non-attorney visitors under supervision. Marcus walked in wearing a beige jumpsuit and a reserved expression. Mid-20s, built lean. He sat opposite her without speaking. The corrections officer gave a nod and stepped aside. "I'm Detective Reyes," Natalie said. "I'm reopening Evelyn Marx's disappearance." Marcus's gaze broke. He leaned back in the chair, studying her. "You serious?" he said after a moment. "Yes." He exhaled through his nose. "Nobody said that name to me in 10 years. I wanted to talk to you about the last time you saw her." He hesitated. "She said she had something big." "When?" "Week before trial, maybe 4, 5 days before jury pick." Natalie took out a small notebook. "What did she say?" Marcus tapped a finger on the table. "She said the case was rotten, that it wasn't just me, that she was working on something bigger, and if she could break it open, she'd take them down with it." "She say who them was?" He shrugged. "No, but she said cops, more than one." Natalie paused. "Did you believe her?" "I didn't have much left to believe in back then," he said. "But yeah, I did." Marcus leaned forward slightly. "She was the only person who looked me in the eye and didn't see a gang kid or a waste of court time." A correctional officer stepped back into the doorway. 2 more minutes." Natalie nodded. "Is there anything else you remember? Anything unusual about her behavior?" "No, that was the last time I met her. I heard what happened after. They probably got to her before she could act." Marcus tapped his fist lightly on the table as she turned to leave. She deserved better than a headline and a closed file. Back at her desk, Natalie pulled the visitor logs for Clinton Correctional. The week Marcus had mentioned, no entry for Evelyn Marx. No security footage was retained from that year. She requested verification from the warden's office anyway, but she already knew what they'd say. No record, no visit, no oversight. The absence was louder than any paper trail. She then pulled the original court transcripts from People v. Brandt. The suppression hearing motions Evelyn had filed were mentioned, but not attached. The hearing was never held. After Evelyn's disappearance, Marcus had accepted a plea deal to avoid a possible life sentence. Natalie skimmed the court's order to close the case. The judge had noted Evelyn's absence, but made no inquiry into why her files weren't present. There were no continuances requested. The case simply moved on, without her. Natalie leaned back in her chair. Something didn't sit right. She returned to the trial transcript and reread the testimonies. The arresting officer, Detective DeLuca, had claimed Marcus was apprehended after a tip from a neighborhood witness. No witness was ever named, no tip sheet included. The second officer, Humes, provided minimal supplemental detail. Natalie opened another folder, People vs. Donnelly, 1995. A different defendant, same detectives. Nearly identical phrasing in the arrest narrative. Witness report, foot chase, gun recovered from alley dumpster. She checked People vs. J. Berea, also from 95. Again, DeLuca, Humes, similar narrative. Natalie closed the files and locked them in her cabinet. She had enough to start pulling threads, but it still wasn't clear how many people were holding the rope or how far they were willing to go to keep it from unraveling. Natalie Reyes had filled out the IA records request by noon. Standard process, triple copy. One for her file, one for internal review, one that would disappear into a drawer somewhere at one police plaza. She wasn't holding her breath. She handed the folder to the records liaison, a tired-looking man who barely looked up. "These are sealed reviews," he said. "You'll need clearance." "I'm not asking to publish them. Just view the chain of complaints filed against Detectives DeLuca and Humes between 1995 and 1997. "Could take weeks," he replied, already moving the file into a bin marked pending. "Let me know if that suddenly changes." She left without waiting for a response. Reyes had worked in enough departments to recognize that weeks didn't mean bureaucratic delay. It meant avoidance. Back at her temporary rental, an old one-bedroom suite above a closed photo studio, she dropped her keys on the counter and opened her laptop. Her inbox was empty. No updates from ballistics, no calls returned from the original court clerks, and nothing from the DA's office about the Brandt motions. She didn't expect movement. She checked the mailbox outside more out of habit than hope. Inside, among a junk mail flyer and an oil change reminder addressed to the previous tenant, was a plain manila envelope. No return address, no postmark. She opened it on the counter. One photograph slid out. A grainy image, clearly a frame from an old security camera, showed Evelyn Marks standing in the hallway of a courthouse. She was facing a woman in clerk uniform, mid-30s, olive complexion, hair back in a tight bun. On the back of the photo, scrawled in blue ink, Torres, 42nd Precinct. Natalie cross-referenced internal precinct staff logs from 1996. Only one match surfaced. Alina Torres, civilian employee, left the department in early '97. No forwarding address. No employment history under the same name since. After 2 hours of searching DMV records, nursing assistant databases, and tracing a minor name change request filed in Ulster County, Natalie found a match. Alina Marquez. The address linked to a small elder care facility just outside Binghamton. Natalie made the drive the next day, keeping her badge off display. The home was quiet, low-staffed. She checked in under the pretext of asking about a relative. After a few questions, she found Alina in a corner lounge near the back, folding towels beside a woman in a wheelchair. Alina looked older than the photo suggested, thinner too, and cautious. Natalie approached slowly. "Ms. Marquez, I'm not here to cause trouble. I just need a few minutes of your time." Alina looked up, already wary. "I'm not who you think I am. You worked at the 42nd Precinct. You knew Evelyn Marks." The towel slipped from Alina's hands. She didn't answer. Natalie reached into her coat and pulled out the photo. Alina stared at it. Then, quietly, "You shouldn't have come here." "I'm looking into Evelyn's disappearance. Your name came up," Natalie said. "She scared them," she said. "That's the truth. A few days before she vanished, I remember her walking in with this envelope." "What was in it?" "I don't know. She wouldn't say. Just asked where the commander's inbox was. Said she needed to make sure it got into the right hands. Did it? No. That envelope never showed up anywhere. I asked a clerk the next day, and they said no such complaint had been logged. Natalie waited. Alina took a long breath. The night before she disappeared, I was walking past the break room. I heard DeLuca say, "If she's gotta go, she's gotta go." Humes laughed. I didn't stop walking. Did you report it? I transferred out the next week, put in a resignation, changed my name. I didn't wait to be next. Do you remember the name Luis Rojas? Alina's expression tightened. He was in holding. I remember the name because it came over dispatch twice. Evelyn said he was helping her, some kind of CI. He vanished 2 days before she did, just gone. No record of transfer, no discharge sheet, nothing. Do you think that's connected? I think it's all connected. Natalie didn't return to her rental right away. She stopped by a gas station, filled up the tank, then parked at a diner down the road and reviewed her notes for 2 hours. Names, dates, motions, disappearances. When she finally pulled into the parking lot behind her unit, she knew something was off before she even stepped out. Her front passenger tire was half deflated. The rear one was fully flat, not punctured by nails, sliced, clean and precise. Natalie crouched and checked the treads, both front and back on the right side. She didn't need a forensics kit to recognize what it meant. Someone had been close enough to send a message. Natalie didn't sleep. By morning, she had rerouted her focus entirely back to the briefcase. It wasn't just a recovered item anymore, it was a crime scene. She called in a favor to the Regional Crime Lab in Poughkeepsie and requested a secondary forensic sweep, this time with priority handling. The tech on the phone hesitated. Protocol was to only repeat analysis when specifically prompted by a lead detective or DA. But when Natalie used the phrase, possible officer-involved homicide, things moved faster. 3 hours later, she was standing in a chilled lab, arms folded, while a pair of forensic technicians worked under focused task lighting. It's degraded, one of them said, turning the case slowly on a padded tray. But we can still try swabbing the inner seams and zipper tracks. Sometimes particulate stays caught under the metal teeth. They used fine-tipped brushes and protein markers, gently lifting what residue they could. It took hours. Then a second tech, younger, called from across the room. You're going to want to see this. They'd pulled a minute but consistent trace of dried epithelial cells from between the zipper folds, cells with intact nuclei. Enough for a viable DNA profile. It took 1 more day to run the match. Natalie sat in her car outside the lab, staring at the windshield until the call came through. The match was clear. Carter Humes. She drove to Albany before the ink dried on the lab report. Carter Humes lived in a bland duplex tucked behind a defunct laundromat, the kind of neighborhood where houses looked occupied but rarely stirred. She waited outside until the porch light came on, then stepped out and rang the bell. Humes answered half a minute later, unshaven, in jeans and a thermal shirt, eyes scanning past her before settling on the badge. Detective Reyes, she introduced, holding it steady. I'd like to ask you a few questions about Evelyn Marks. He didn't move. That case is 12 years old. I know, that's why it's surprising your DNA turned up on her briefcase. His expression didn't change, but he stepped back without protest, motioning her inside. The living room was plain, no photos, no clutter, just a recliner and a dusty bookshelf that hadn't been touched in years. Humes sat, leaned forward on his knees. Look, he said, I don't know what you think you found. The lab confirmed a match. We pulled trace DNA, your skin, embedded in the zipper seam. He shook his head slowly as if buying time. Natalie stayed on her feet. That briefcase was found last month in the Croton River. You were never listed in the original file, never interviewed. But Evelyn's sister said she carried that case with her constantly. So how'd your DNA end up on it? He looked at the floor, then up again. Something behind his eyes gave. I didn't kill her. Then help me understand what happened." There was a long pause. Then he stood and walked to the window, arms crossed. "It wasn't supposed to go that far," he said. "Ray just wanted to scare her. She was making noise, talking about IA complaints, said she had evidence." "You confronted her?" "I waited for her at the parking lot that night. I told her to back off. She wouldn't. I knocked her out, shoved her in her car, and drove off." His voice had flattened out now, a quiet recitation. "But she woke up when we got near the bridge. Things got real ugly. She tried to escape, so I had to stop. She swung the briefcase at me, hit my jaw. I grabbed it and threw it. It tumbled down the river." Natalie didn't speak. "And then?" "I called Ray, told him it got out of hand. He told me to bring her to him. She was still alive when I left her with him. That was the last time I saw her." "Where?" Humes hesitated. "There's a place, an old narcotics cabin, north end of the training woods, not on the maps. Ray used it sometimes. Said it was clean, quiet." Natalie took out her notepad. "Address?" "There's no address. Just off Route 301, half a mile east of an old ranger trail. You'll need dogs." She closed the notepad. "You're under arrest, Humes. Obstruction of justice, accessory to murder, and failure to report a crime." To her surprise, he didn't resist. He just nodded and let her cuff him. They booked him at a regional holding facility that night. It was quiet. No press, no leaks. Natalie notified the DA's office and requested a full forensic team for the cabin search the next morning. She returned to her rental and updated her notes until almost 2 a.m. At 7:14 a.m., her phone rang. It was the desk sergeant from Albany. "Humes is dead." She sat upright. "How?" "Found hanging in his cell, torn bedsheet tied to a vent." "Suicide?" "That's what they're calling it." "Was he placed in isolation?" "Yes." "Anyone on shift with ties to the 42nd Precinct?" The line went quiet. She hung up. The window across from her reflected her face, calm but tightened. Whatever Humes had left unsaid had died with him. Natalie stood at the edge of the clearing as the warrant team cut through overgrowth with machetes and bolt cutters. The trail off Route 301 had turned nearly invisible from neglect. Her boots sank into soft moss, every step weighted with Humes's last words. The cabin appeared like a scar in the woods, tilted, weather-beaten, half swallowed by foliage. She circled it slowly, her eyes scanning the terrain. DeLuca hadn't picked this place by accident. It was forgotten, quiet. A K-9 unit handler clipped a leash onto his German Shepherd and gave the command. The dog darted around the perimeter, nose close to the ground. Another crew began photographing the site and sketching its layout. Natalie stayed out of their way, taking in the perimeter from a higher spot near the tree line. She knew they might find nothing. It had been years. Bones scattered, weather worn. Soil and time didn't preserve the truth easily. But something in her gut said Evelyn was here. It was close to dusk when the first alert came. The dog stiffened and began barking sharply, tail rigid, nose fixed on a point halfway down the slope behind the cabin. The handler knelt to mark the spot, calling in the recovery team. Natalie made her way down, her boots slipping slightly in the loose dirt. The slope had been concealed with natural growth, ferns, dry brush, fallen pine limbs. But the dog had caught something. They began excavation carefully. A perimeter was marked. Soil was removed layer by layer with trowels and brushes. It took 2 hours before one of the techs stood up and called out quietly, "We have textile." Natalie moved to the edge of the dig. A flash of dull maroon cloth peeked through the dirt, clinging to decomposed fragments of fabric. Nearby, brittle bone, a femur, then ribs. They worked in silence as the remains were uncovered. A woman's skeletal body wrapped in a torn trench coat, partially mummified by the soil. Natalie looked at the color of the coat, deep wine red. Laura had mentioned Evelyn wore it the day she vanished. A cracked wristwatch. Both bagged for cataloging. Back at the regional lab, the remains underwent a full examination. The fractures were consistent with an assault, not an accident. The forensic pathologist, Dr. Ellman, confirmed what Natalie suspected. She fought back. There are defensive fractures on the ulna, and we found epithelial tissue embedded under the nail beds. Natalie looked up. Viable? Enough to run a profile. We're fast-tracking the results. By the time the DNA report hit her desk, Natalie Reyes already knew what it would say. Skin fragments recovered from under Evelyn Marks's fingernails were a match for Detective Ray DeLuca. The forensic confirmation didn't spark a celebration, it just narrowed the field. She stood in the lab hallway for a long moment after reading the report, jaw set, eyes unfocused. Back at the precinct, she typed the warrant application with methodical precision. She included a supplemental request for a sealed indictment. She didn't want this leaking, not before she was ready. The DA signed off without hesitation. He'd seen enough. Natalie called in her task force, just 5 names, all hand-picked, 2 internal affairs agents she trusted, a federal marshal, a forensic analyst, and a seasoned officer from her prior post in Syracuse. They met in a back conference room at 7:30 p.m., doors locked. "We have one shot at this," she told them. "DeLuca knows the system. He's used it to stay clean, but he's not clean anymore." She laid out the arrest plan, the routes, the risk. No press, no leaks. When we move quiet. The next morning, before the task force could roll out, DeLuca vanished. When Natalie got the alert, she was already en route to brief the marshals. A detective from 1st Precinct called her personally. He was seen leaving his house this morning, not alone. "Who with?" "2 guys. One's retired narcotics. Other one's been off duty since a use of force complaint last year. We ID'd them both, Eric Baum and Vince Rollo." Both names had surfaced before in internal affairs reports: suppression of evidence, unofficial surveillance, intimidation. "Send the footage. I want timestamp, direction, plates." Natalie watched the clip 3 times before saying anything. DeLuca looked calm. The men with him didn't rush. The SUV pulled out of his driveway just past dawn, heading north. She issued the bolo herself. By noon, the U.S. Marshals were looped in. Border checkpoints were quietly alerted. It wasn't a manhunt, not yet, but it was close. The SUV was spotted by an LPR scanner 3 hours later, just south of Plattsburgh. Natalie was already in the air by then. She landed in Burlington and was driven across the border zone to coordinate with the local intercept team. The bolo had worked. A customs agent recognized the plates at a secondary checkpoint and called it in. The SUV was pulled over 20 miles from the Canadian crossing in a wooded turnout off Route 9. Natalie and the marshals approached with caution. Guns were drawn, not raised. The 2 officers stepped out first, palms open. "Get out of the car, Ray." It took a few seconds, but eventually DeLuca emerged. His jacket was zipped, his expression unreadable. "You really brought the whole show," he muttered. "It's over." No resistance, no outbursts. DeLuca was cuffed and seated in the back of the lead vehicle. The other 2 men were taken into custody without incident. Natalie didn't speak again until they were on the highway, headed back toward the city. She turned slightly in her seat to look at him. "We found her." DeLuca didn't blink. "I figured you might." The ride back was long but not silent. Natalie flipped through the contents of a secondary folder on her lap, copies of Evelyn's cassette transcript, the forensic summary, and a log of DeLuca's prior misconduct allegations. She wasn't sure if he noticed, but she laid it out deliberately, 1 page at a time. DeLuca shifted only once. "You think this gets you a win?" Natalie didn't answer. The car drove on. The moment they arrived at the precinct, DeLuca was interrogated. The steel door clicked shut behind Natalie Reyes. DeLuca was already seated, cuffed, posture loose, like he was waiting on a dentist rather than a murder charge. He barely looked at her as she pulled out the chair opposite him and sat down, laying her file on the table without a word. "So," DeLuca said, leaning back, "this is the part where you try to scare me with something you think you know." Natalie studied him for a moment. "No, This is the part where I show you what we've proven." He smirked, unimpressed. "You've got nothing. A dead woman's voice and a bag of mold. It's all speculation." Natalie didn't respond. She reached into the file folder and pulled out the small cassette recorder. The casing had been cleaned, the tape inside rewound and copied. She pressed play. The voice that filled the room was faint, static-laced, but unmistakable. DeLuca, Humes, CI threats, Rojas, forged statements. If I disappear, it was them. DeLuca's eyes flicked toward the recorder. For a split second, his confidence faltered, but it came back quickly, hardening. "That's your smoking gun? You think some half-audible whisper from a paranoid lawyer's going to hold up?" Natalie opened the folder on the table and slid a page toward him. It's not just her voice anymore. DeLuca didn't touch the page, he just stared at her. "We recovered this from her sister's house. Evelyn left a note, said she was keeping a second copy in case something happened. The note was dated 2 weeks before she vanished." She laid out the contents slowly. A second cassette, affidavits, typed, signed, copies of the forged witness statements used in Marcus Brandt's trial, and finally, a list of names, officers, supervisors, even a DA liaison, all tied to cases with a pattern of falsified evidence or coerced testimony. Natalie kept her voice level. "You forged the statement that placed Marcus Brandt at the scene. The officer who was killed, Officer Quinn, had threatened to go to internal affairs about you. Evelyn found out. That's why you shut her down." DeLuca's jaw tightened. His smirk was gone. Natalie didn't blink. "She named you, on tape, on paper, in front of witnesses. She told your story before you could bury it. You just didn't dig deep enough." He stared at the table, unmoving. "We've already handed the materials over to the district attorney's office. A grand jury is being convened. You're being charged with murder, obstruction of justice, conspiracy to falsify evidence, and destruction of protected materials." 2 uniformed officers entered the room on cue. One of them walked behind DeLuca and unlatched his cuffs from the table. The other stepped forward and secured his wrists behind his back. DeLuca said nothing. His eyes stayed fixed on the folder, but something in his posture shifted, stiffened. The officers walked him out. Natalie stood alone in the room, hands on the edge of the table. She stared at the recorder, still sitting in the center like it had been waiting to be heard this whole time. The press conference room at the district attorney's office was filled to capacity. Natalie stood to the side of the podium, arms crossed, the weight of everything she'd uncovered resting heavy on her spine. DA Miriam Gold took the mic. Her voice was calm but unmistakably firm. "A grand jury has returned indictments in the case of Evelyn Marks, the attorney who disappeared in 1996 under circumstances we now understand to be murder and obstruction of justice." A low murmur rolled through the room. Raymond DeLuca has been charged with first-degree murder, conspiracy to commit obstruction, and destruction of evidence. Carter Humes, now deceased, has been named posthumously in obstruction and accessory to murder. 3 additional former officers, Vince Rullo, Eric Baum, and Joanne Frisk, have been indicted for their roles in wrongful convictions tied to fabricated evidence and coerced testimony. Natalie kept her face composed, but she could feel the press glancing her way. When Gold gestured for her to step forward, she approached the mic slowly. Evelyn Marks was a lawyer, a sister, and a tireless advocate for her clients, Natalie said. She risked everything to speak truth to power. Her voice was silenced, but her evidence remained. And it was her voice on tape that reopened the door. She paused, looking into the crowd. Justice took too long. Upstate, in a correctional facility that had seen too many broken men, Marcus Brandt stood in his cell, eyes on the clock above the guard station. He'd stopped counting the years a while ago, but he hadn't stopped waiting. The metal door clanged open. A guard motioned. "Pack up, you're being released." Marcus didn't move at first. For what? "Conviction vacated. They found new evidence. You're cleared." When he stepped outside an hour later, the sun hit his face like a foreign warmth. He didn't smile, didn't run, just looked up, blinking against the brightness. Natalie was waiting near the gates. She held out a small manila envelope. "Bus fare, prepaid phone, hotel room for the night. There's a legal aid group that wants to help you get set up." He nodded slowly, the envelope still in her hand. "She believed me," he said finally. "All this time I thought maybe she gave up." "She didn't," Natalie said, "and neither did you." The cemetery sat on a quiet hillside just past the edge of town. The grounds were manicured, rows of identical stones arranged in symmetry. But one stood apart, freshly installed, the granite still bright beneath the morning sky. Evelyn Marks. Natalie Reyes stood a few paces back, coat collar turned up against the wind. Beside her were Marcus Brandt and Laura Marks. A bouquet of white lilies rested at the base of the headstone, left by someone earlier. Laura carried a single rose. They approached in silence. Marcus stepped forward first. He crouched and placed the rose on the stone. "Thank you for giving me my life back, for standing up for me," he said, his voice low. He stood slowly, wiping at one eye. Laura followed. Her hand trembled slightly as she touched the engraved letters. "You won, Evie. Rest easy," she whispered. Natalie remained still, her gaze fixed on the name etched in stone. Before leaving, Natalie paused, pulling a folded envelope from her coat pocket. It was a photocopy of Evelyn's original complaint to Internal Affairs, the one they'd found buried beneath layers of silence and time. She looked at the paper, then at the grave. "You fought the right fight," she said. "We heard you. Justice is served." She tucked the copy under a stone at the edge of the grave. It wouldn't last long against the elements, but it wasn't meant to. It was a gesture, a full circle. Marcus and Laura waited near the path. Natalie joined them. As they walked down the slope, leaving Evelyn behind for the last time, no one spoke. There was nothing left to prove, nothing left to uncover. Only the truth that had been fought for, and the woman who had never stopped fighting. Thanks for watching till the end. If you enjoyed this story, give this video a like if you haven't already, and subscribe for more.